what is the problem we are trying to solve?
So thank you for the question. The problem we are trying to solve is the some landlords across the city have let their buildings fall into disrepair. We feel it's important for tenants to have quality living standards at a high standard. And in order to meet those standards, we've developed this program in such a way that landlords need to turn their mind to having capital plans, to having cleaning plans, to having a number of different plans that ensure that your building is kept to the standard that tenants deserve.
Okay, and I haven't seen this motion that's coming up later, but if we were to go with the system that has the red, yellow, green, how are you resourced? And for example, if a building was red and solutions were made quickly, do you have resources so that you could be running around re-inspecting right away and changing signs back, or would these signs be there for a period of time?
Thank you for the question. So that's one of the challenges that we're looking to resolve. We want to spend our time in the worst buildings, getting them up to yellow and to green. That requires detailed audits, and that requires providing notices to the landlord of what they're required to fix. We want to use our resources effectively to be focused on those buildings, and we don't want to use our resources to be, we're not as nimble to be changing a sign every day or every week.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, through you to Mr. Grant. And I think you've answered a number of the questions that I was going to ask, that Councillor Holiday has asked, and also part of one that Councillor McKelvey has just asked. But so can you tell me, with respect to our Toronto community housing, does this color coding system, does it apply to Toronto community housing properties as well?
Yes, it does. The only point of clarification, the difference, they go through the same process, the same signs, they just are exempt from fees.
From the fees, that's the difference. So we're going to be held to the same high standards of expectation that we're hoping to hold the private sector.
That is correct.
Right. And so if a landlord does not do the work based on the color coding system, it's not clear to me. So we're going to hire a contractor to go in to do the work on behalf of the city, and we'll add it to their taxes to be paid later?
So through the speaker, and thank you for the question, Deputy Mayor Thompson, what we are doing is, that is one of our tools. We want to use the audit to identify notices for them to repair within 15 days, 30 days, 60 days, whatever a reasonable time frame is. Failure to do that, we would use one of our tools, and that is remedial action. But we only want to use that in instances where they haven't done what they should do. We need landlords to be accountable and be their own property managers. We as the city do not want to become their property managers.
Right. The system that we have now, though, does it allow you to take the action in terms of doing the remedial action that you've referenced?
I believe what we've done is strengthen that through this report. We have not done a lot of remedial action related to this program, and we will be moving forward if we need to. So we've increased fines, we've increased the opportunity to use remedial action, all in an effort to improve the quality of housing for these tenants.
Right. And so currently, some of the challenges I've seen in the system, some of the challenges I've had in my own ward, where you go in and you issue a citation and the matter goes to court, then it gets elongated. Does this color coding system, does that change that? Because when the matter goes to court, we at that point don't have the ability to intervene. We have to wait for that process to take place. Is that not correct?
That is correct. There's still an opportunity because some of these are property standards appeals, and there is an appeal process, and it can go before the before the courts. But again, the intent of the color coding is to motivate to be, to be the best building that you can be, and to get from red to yellow to green.
So I thought what I heard, part of your response to a question that was asked earlier, you talk about the the signage and the impact and the issue around whether or not it stigmatizes those who live in those particular properties. I thought I heard you intimated that, that the sort of requirement for a landlord to be a good landlord, it would somehow have an impact in terms of tenants choosing to live in that building or another building, given the choice. But my question to you, though, is given the shortage of rental unit that exists in this city, is this really practical to make that assumption? I mean, clearly we want to make sure properties are clean and well maintained, and so I get that. But I'm just wondering if the color coding system that's being proposed, whether or not that actually shames the landlord into action that would somehow dissuade someone from wanting to rent, given the fact that we have such great shortage in the city.
So great question, and yeah, we don't know if the color coding system is going to have the intended effect that we hope it does. You're right, there is a shortage of rental housing, and people need to find where they can live. But it's just the difference with the Dine Safe is that people don't have as much choice. It's not like a restaurant, right? So we can always go to the next restaurant, but it's not as easy to go to the next rental apartment. So
right, that was the point. Thank you.
No, great point.
Thank you. I have a question. Actually, Councillor Thompson asked one of my questions about Toronto housing. But when it comes to Toronto housing, we are waiving the fees, but as far as the color coding signs, would that still be in the buildings?
Yes, to the speaker. Yes, the color coding system will be in all
housing.
buildings that fall within the program, including Toronto Community Housing and some of the other housing that
So the signage.
SHA have, yes.
Yeah, okay. Even though their fees are waived, they still will be monitored. And as far as the number of issues that have come up from MLS and some of our units, correct?
That is correct. I do want to point out that TCHC buildings under our current program their averages are very similar to private buildings.
Okay, now I know when we started this, we started at government management a few years ago when we heard a number of deputations on this issue. And the reason for this is because of the number of calls that we were getting in from tenants on some of these buildings where we had slum landlords where the buildings have, landlords have refused to repair some of these buildings. And so that's where we started. I believe that was a few years ago through government management, and that's the reason why we're here today is to bring this forward, correct? So it's been a long time that we've been working on this. Am I correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we've been working on this since 2012. This program used to be called MRAB, and it was through government and licensing because that's where MLS reported. It's evolved with the new system that this is a housing matter, and so that's why the last time this has come through Planning and Housing Committee. But yeah, this has been a long-standing piece of work, and through a lot of effort, it is where it is today.
Now, we're still doing audits of our buildings. Are we still continuing that in some of the problem buildings?
Through you, Madam Speaker, yes, we did stop providing these services in the early months of the pandemic, but we brought it back online. And again, our focus this year has been on the lowest scoring buildings. And, we did 17 audits in the summer, and audits are extensive pieces of work.
Okay, thank you very much.
Very welcome.
Councillor Fletcher?
Yes, could you just walk me through from doing an inspection and finding the violations, the timeline? How long is a landlord given to remedy? Can they get an extension? Are there posted violation notices or notices that indicate the work that needs to be done? Just walk us through that, please.
Sure. I'm actually going to ask if my director for this program, Elizabeth Glibbery, could walk us through that.
Could you hold my time, please, speaker? Thank you.
Do we have staff here?
Yeah, Elizabeth, I see you there. You just need to unmute.
Sorry.
There you are.
Okay, so Councillor Fletcher,
Okay.
through the speaker.
Yes.
When a complaint is received, staff attend within 5 days. At the point of attendance, depending on what the issue is or the urgency of the issue, a notice is issued or an order is issued, and the tenant or the landlord has a certain amount of time to respond.
How much time?
Minimum for the property standards order is usually around 19 days. It could be lengthier though, depending on what the issue is. Or if it's deemed an emergency, it could be within a very short time, like an emergency order. It would be like within 24 hours, if it's a heat issue, for example.
Okay, and can they appeal that? Is that appealable or?
Absolutely. So through the speaker, they have 14 days to appeal the order. And if they do appeal the order, it goes to PSAC, which they can make changes to the time to comply. They can modify the order, or they can rescind the order.
And so it could be quite a lengthy process.
Absolutely. Through the speaker, councillor, could be very lengthy.
If a landlord, and at what point do you intervene and say we have to fix it along before the city actually starts that work?
Yeah, through the speaker, at the point where it's impacting directly on health or safety of those tenants. And we've had a few cases recently where we had to actually intervene and take over the remedial action that was required on one of our apartment buildings.
Yes, I'm aware. But are those violations posted anywhere online? Like Dine Safe, you can see about the inspection and what met or didn't meet code or wasn't properly done.
Through the speaker.
Yep.
Yeah, through the speaker, the notices or orders should be posted on the tenant board. I do believe they're online, but it's just an investigation that's online, not the actual order or notice. It's just that the investigation has occurred and the status of the investigation.
And we have this is just different things that we have. We have Dine Safe, which has the cards. We have a childcare system. Maybe I'll ask the deputy city manager if she's there about this one. Every licensed childcare has a rating system that we use. Are those posted in the childcare centers or are those posted online?
Through the chair, could you just clarify, is that question for
No, I think it's a question for Deputy City Manager Carboni or Shanley if they're aware, if they're on this item.
And are there any other types of rating systems that we have outside of the two, the Dine Safe and the child care ratings?
Okay, do we have staff to answer that question?
Yep.
Okay.
My apology, Madam Speaker. Sorry, Councillor Fletcher, can you just repeat that question? I don't think Shanley's on.
Okay, we're just talking about different rating systems that the city currently has. And we have a rating system that exists public health, which is Dine Safe, which is on the business, and then we have a rating system for childcare centers. Is that posted at the childcare, or is that simply online? I don't know the answer.
So I'm not 100% sure, but I believe it's online. I'm not sure if it's posted. I know it's online. I can get that information and email you later this afternoon or later today, Councillor Fletcher, if that's okay.
Yes, all right. Thank you very much. And now I just want to go back to you, Mr. Grant. You now have a roster through RentSafe. You now have a roster of contractors that you can call without going on each kind of repair for violations. You would have to go out and individually select a contractor based on 3 quotes or based on a tender. Now that you've done the roster, you have much more ability to intervene quickly to fix situations. Am I right about that?
That was your last question.
Yes, that is correct. We have learned over the years that we need that fluidity, and we have established contracts that allow us to hire people quicker to do remedial action when necessary. Yes.
Like other departments have.
Thank you.
That is correct.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Councillor Grimes, question?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Carlton, under the same line of questioning, Councillor or Deputy Mayor Thompson, there's not a lot of supply out there. So a lot of people living in some of these buildings. I got a couple bad operators in my ward where.
Sorry, I've lost his audio. Sorry, Councillor Grant. There you go. Oh.
Kind of stop. Can you hear me better now, Carlton?
Yes, you're back on.
Yeah, so just under the same line of questioning as Councillor Thompson, some of these tenants don't really know they have mental health issues, may not know there's an option, and it's very limited to go somewhere else. But we have a lot of bad operators in my ward, which your office has helped us out tremendously. But some of these frequent flyers that are bad acts, is there enough possibility with all this government assistance they're getting directly from the government, from your income, whatever, is there a possibility of holding their rent back? Just like we have in COVID times where we're not allowing them to evict them, but is there a tool to maybe say, look, you can't evict this tenant and we're not going to pay until it's fixed? Is that a tool in your toolbox we may be able to use? Maybe a question for legal, I'm not too sure.
Yeah, sorry, through the speaker to Councillor Grimes, that is not under our purview. The program doesn't allow for involvement with tenants' rent or increases or decreases. No.
But is that something we can look at?
I don't think so. Landlord-tenant issues are provincial with the Residential Tenancies Act. I know there's a group at the city on rent evictions. Perhaps that's a logical place for it. Perhaps the housing secretariat, but is not a municipal licensing and standards matter that we can intervene on.
Okay, those are my questions, Master. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to speakers now. If you want to speak, if you can please put your name. Councillor Bailao to speak.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. As you mentioned in your remarks, this has been a long time in the works. But as you've heard, I think, from our staff, I think there are some things that are still in the works, and particularly with regards to the criteria, the categories, the weight. I think staff have identified in the report that this is something that they need to continue to work with. My issue is that I think this needs to be settled before it actually the program starts. I think it is fair that we have more of a decisive approach. I think it's going to be a lot fair for tenants and landlords if they know what they're clearly being evaluated and they have the proper weight, the fine on these things. I do understand that there's a motion that has been worked on, and that's why I'm not moving a motion, because I think it responds to some of these concerns that we outlined even when this report was at committee. I think that also important is the fact that we need to ensure that there's an opportunity to focus on the buildings that are red and to ensure that they move quickly to the green. I think that staff got it right. I think they really need to focus on those red buildings. And the last point that I would like to make is, you know, I do understand some of the concerns with the stigma that might be allocated, but this actually goes in line with the comments that were made about the lack of supply. There is very, very shortage of housing out there, and there's not a lot for people to choose from. And I do think that we have to do everything we possibly can to ensure that these buildings have the best quality of housing possible. And I think that's where the program is trying to get. And in particular, in a very tight rental market, this is very important that the city is on top of these buildings and working with landlords and tenants to ensure that the stock that we have available in the city is in the best possible shape to house the families in here. So I haven't seen the full motion, but I think that it responds to some of the concerns that are raised here, and I'm looking forward to taking a look and being able to support this going forward, but with several amendments that respond to these concerns.
Thank you. Councillor Holliday, followed by Councillor Matlow.
Thank you, Speaker. I do have a motion. It's fairly short. I hope it's agreeable to everybody. It's just to ask the Municipal Licensing and Standards to consider developing a rent-safe TO report, just using existing data, so that it can be provided to prospective tenants and existing tenants. And we would require the landlords to provide it. So if I'm just going to talk a little bit more about this report in general. I've thought a lot about it. I can't support recommendations 1 and 2 as written. We'll see what the amendments are that are coming along. No one's talked to me about them, but I don't know. To me, if you have this great big red sign in front of the door when you walk into your home, it gets humiliating. It's like somebody painted a big X on the door, like the plague is in this building. I guess, you know, that be nice to put some pressure on some landlords to do something, but if you've got a building score of 37 today, you can go online, you can download them all, by the way. You just go to Open Data, you download the spreadsheet, they're all there. But I guess it's a lot to expect everybody to hunt out this information online. I don't think it's going to change the landlord. I mean, I disagree with the sentiments of others. I think the only people humiliated in this are going to be the people that actually live there, because they don't have a choice. They can't just pack up and leave. If they're in a rent-protected suite, they can't afford to necessarily just pack up and leave. So, you know, what's going to be done? Well, what needs to be done, of course, is to continue to enforce and inspect buildings, to issue orders, to follow through on courts, to make sure that people complete these activities. The only idea I thought that we could try to influence is consumer choice at the outset. So when somebody goes to rent a building, can we as a city provide them information that might help them make their choice? Maybe they don't have a choice, I don't know. I mean, the rental market is pretty tough, as Deputy Mayor Bylaw mentioned. But my thought is, you know, just like when you buy a used car, you can get an information package from the government, or if you want, you can go and download consumer reports from, or look it up at the library. You can learn a little bit about the product that you're trying to get. If we could pull together information like the building score, if we could pull together information like recent complaints or investigation requests, if we could put things like orders onto a one-page report that somebody can download from the internet easily, and if we force landlords to hand that to the consumer before they sign the lease, maybe we can influence something here. Maybe we can influence a discussion about the rent price, if that's what's being negotiated on the lease. But to me, putting a big red sign up is it's like a big red flag or a pox on the building. And I don't think that helps a lot for the tenants that live there. I suspect the landlords that are the troublemakers, The ones with the scores that stay low, I don't think they're going to be influenced by a sign. I doubt they even go on site to even look at it. It needs to be enforced through the courts. It needs to be enforced with real costs and penalties. And I think we have a very good MLS department to do that. And I hope they continue it. I hope they are able to spend more resources on it as we get through COVID and they can turn their attention back to these type of important things. Madam Speaker, those are my comments. And unless things are modified, I'm going to ask to separate the vote on item number 1 and 2 because I will support the balance of the report, but the specific color-coded card I don't agree with. And I think we can do this better. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Matlow to speak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I asked the clerk earlier to advance circulate the motion. I hope that you've all received it. Either way, obviously, I move it before you now. What this motion is as I alluded to in my questions to Carlton, a reflection of us really compiling these specific concerns that we've been hearing, in particular from organizations such as ACORN and FMTA, who have been really the leaders and champions of these initiatives over the past few years, and work with Carlton and his team to ensure that the implementation considers issues with the initial construction of how they were going to go about it, with respect to like not having, for example, 2 tiers of green, which just would have been confusing and wouldn't have really had a proper incentive for landlords to go to the upper tier of green rather than rest on a lower tier of green, for example, or have a word like excellent, for example, which is more like a first grade report card rather than what I believe we're trying to achieve here. This motion allows for more flexibility to more accurately reflect where a landlord has arrived at throughout the year, rather than depending on an arbitrary annual or biannual audit. So that should be better for both landlords, frankly, because if they're, let's say, stuck in a red or a yellow, they'll be able to get to green if they make improvements within that year, but also more accurately informative for tenants, so that they're not stuck in a situation where they keep complaining about bed bugs, for example, and the landlord is still at green. So in other words, it's just more accurate and it better reflects the facts for everybody involved. It has been, as you may remember, like when we first initiated this out of the Tenants Advisory Committee, there was a bit of there was some friction with staff. Certainly, the lobbyists from the landlords were coming after us at that time, and it was really difficult. But ACORN and FMTA and others really went to work on this, and since then, our relationship with staff has not only evolved into one that has been constructive. It has been a pleasure to work with them. They get it. They're hearing us. They've been proactive, and in fact, there have been moments where, even though I thought that I was right and I thought that I had a good idea, staff have provided information to us and have done a better job. And really, we've arrived at a really good place. In particular, I want to thank my Chief of Staff, Andrew Athanasiou, who's been deeply passionate about this, and also Ginny Addy from Municipal Licensing and Standards, who has just done remarkable work, along with Carlton Grant and their entire team. And I also want to thank, again, ACORN and FMTA. Your advocacy on behalf of tenants is noticed, it's effective, you achieve results, and it's because of your work that we've successfully approved motions over and over again to raise the standards that we expect as a city for tenants, no matter if they're in a privately owned building or Toronto community housing alike. The last thing I just wanted to note on is this issue around stigma. We had this debate before. What tenants consistently tell us is that a sign isn't going to further stigmatize them. they're stigmatized by the shame of not even wanting to invite family or friends sometimes to their building because of the conditions that it's left in. So we had that debate. This debate now is about the process of implementation rather than whether or not we're going to do this. We've already moved motions and approved them, I believe 3 times, to ask staff to do this. And now we're discussing how to do it well. So thank you for your ongoing support for tenants in this city, to all of you.
Thank you. Councillor Perks to speak, followed by Councillor McKelvey.
Speaker, I'm going back and forth with the clerks on a motion that I am trying to prepare that would keep the program but remove the signs on the building. We're trying to find the right words. If you could bump me down until we've settled on something.
Sure. Councillor McKelvey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'm comforted to hear that Councillor Perks is working on that motion. I am very troubled by putting up a sign that's red or orange or yellow on a building. And I do think that it stigmatizes residents. And, you know, I grew up in a building and I had, you know, I considered my kids that were rich were kids that lived in a house or had a car. And I can remember, you know, dating somebody and his mother dropped him off and she was mortified that I lived in an apartment building, in a suburban apartment building. And I can't even imagine what that would be like if they had showed up and there was a yellow or a red sign in the lobby. It does further stigmatize people. And I asked the question about what is the problem we are trying to solve, and do we have the ability to go back and change those signs if the problem is remedied? And the answer was that we don't. So we need to think about how we can do that better. I do agree with the premise that we need to stop these buildings from being in these conditions and we need to have a way to improve them. But I don't think a sign in a lobby is going to achieve that. So I can't support recommendation 2 in the form that it's in. I appreciate that we are trying to have some sort of indicators. I'm hopeful that Councillor Perks can find a solution that is a better one. Because we do need to make the information available to the people in the building, and we need to put pressure onto landlords. But having a red sign isn't the way to go. This isn't like going into a restaurant. You have the choice to turn around and go somewhere else. If you live in the building, it's very hard to move out of there and find somewhere else to live. So I'm hopeful that we can have a better way to do it than number 2. I wish Councillor Perks good luck in that.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll.
Madam Speaker, I know there are motions coming, but I'm going to speak a little differently than the others for a moment now. And I think it might be geography that creates the difference here. The sign on the front door is a real challenge if you're in a building that's right front facing and it's up on the sidewalk, such as you see as you move further into town. But you know, the tenants that I work with, that we speak to about this, are living in a tower in the park type of setting, and sitting up on a lovely landscaped hill is a building full of bed bugs, and they just want these things changed. And if the sign on the door means that as a unit empties out, you can't get anyone to come back in because that sign is on the door, and maybe that causes the landlord to finally take some actions, is just the few people that I've talked to. It's hard during pandemic times, but just the few I've talked to are willing to take the chance on the sign if it changes things. Asking those who are already in situ to keep track of their building online and check into things is a tough thing to ask of people who are living the kind of life you're living if you're struggling to cover the rent in a red building. It means that you've got probably a family unit that has cobbled together a bunch of precarious work to pay that rent. And on top of that, you don't want to make waves and be intimidated by your landlord. So the idea that the city engages, puts their sign up, and initiates their own actions to start to get some action from that landlord, was kind of comforting to the people I talked to. I don't have to get intimidated. You guys are going to take hard and visible action and finally change something here. I won't have to risk eviction by being the squeaky wheel. And so I guess it depends on the situations you've been through or where the building is and how it's situated, how you feel about the sign. Because I heard people say, yeah, you do it. You go, do this. Get some change between you and the landlord so I'm not at risk. And that's why I asked the questions that I asked about, can we actually enact this program, and can we talk to the tenants and follow up on these things and make this change without the tenants risking landlord intimidation? Because I think that is far more prevalent than we even realize in our tenant population. I really wish that I got far more complaints than I do. I know when I walk into some of the buildings in Don Valley North that I should be getting calls from the people in that building every day by the dozens, and I'm not, because they've given up. And so those that we sought out and asked about this, they said, yeah, throw that sign up so that a big conversation starts between you and your staff and the landlord, and you make something happen. So I look with interest at the motion that might be coming forward as an alternative to the sign, but not everyone is against it, including tenants that would be subject to living in a building with a red sign. So I'll see what the motion says. But I will just finish by saying this, Madam Speaker. I think we do want to, whatever are the bylaw changes that now allow Mr. Grant's team to become more aggressive, while we may be making some refinements to them, we do have to make these first steps to give them the powers and the direction to get this program to perfection. That Councillor Bailão in the very first speech said there are some things that still need to be solidified for her to be comfortable with the program. But let's give the legal powers that we can to staff today, and allow them to aggressively push on the province that if you really want to see a difference for these Ontarians, you need to let us go forward with these things and become a real part of the picture. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Ford.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. This is really this is a tough kind of decision to make for this council. But the one thing I am heartened by is that I think we all are on the same page on really holding landlords to account here and to bring their building standards up. And I think we all want the outcome of that. I think it's how we get there. And quite frankly, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not 100% decided on what way I'm going to fall on this. But look, the one thing I hear in North Etobicoke, and I've been out, I get calls from many of constituents about building standards. I know we all do. And we do have these challenges in North Etobicoke. We have many high-rises and high-rise apartment buildings in North Etobicoke. But I think the question is how we get there. In the pros and cons of putting these colored signs in lobbies, for me, I think, yes, it does put pressure on the landlords. I don't think the side of this debate around landlords just ignoring it and not caring is necessarily true. I do put weight to that, where it does build pressure, because when residents of those buildings walk in, that would no doubt put more pressure on them and kind of anger residents. And we don't want to anger them, but it does put more pressure on the landlords, which is what we want to make these changes. But on the other side, I do see the stigmatization, and that I take particular concern with, or I do have much concern with that. And it's finding out if there's a way of getting to a place where we can continue to put in strong pressure, immense pressure on the landlords to do better, to make these capital investments, so residents in our city have a decent place to live, which is absolutely a fundamental right. And I've done battle with landlords, believe me, in North Etobicoke over this. I've walked every floor and down the stairwells and garbage chutes, and I know we all have. And it's incredibly frustrating to see the conditions people live in some of these buildings. So I'm going to wait to see what Councillor Perks comes up with. As Councillor McKelvey said, I think if there's a better way of doing this, I will support that. So I want to see what comes out of that. So thank you.
Thank you. So I'll just make a few comments till Councillor Perks' motion is ready. I'll wait as well for motion by Councillor Perks. But as it was mentioned, we started this whole process in 2012 of government management. And at that time, there was an outcry from tenants on some of the conditions of some of the buildings where you did have cockroaches and it wasn't properly maintained, no hot water, elevators not working, that were totally filthy. And we would constantly have to send MLS out to investigate, and we've done a number of audits as well. It was getting very frustrating, and so when we started the whole process, we had deputations from tenants and as well as from landlords. And I must say, since we started this whole process, now I think that the number of landlords that are out there are actually listening to us, that we do mean business when it comes to their buildings. It all started out with some of these buildings where we had some landlords that didn't care, and they knew this, there was nothing tenants could do. It would take so long for the city to go in and investigate and give orders, and so it started there. And and with Toronto Housing as well, a lot of complaints. But as you know, just recently we took contract management out of Toronto Housing, and we have it in-house now. So hopefully that would change as far as our Toronto Housing tenants in our buildings. But that's why we started this whole process, and I think that it's important that we hold the landlords accountable, we do something. And so I'm listening to the debate, the questions, so depending on what Councillor Perks' motion will come forward, I think that we need as a council to move forward on with some of these recommendations. We need to protect our tenants that we have, the most vulnerable in our buildings, that are asking for the city to support them. And so I'm looking forward to Councillor Perks' motion, and I'm hoping that we could come forward with a compromise. The intent on making the landlords accountable, but at the same time protecting the tenants as well. So thank you. Do we have Councillor Perks' motion? Okay,
I believe we do.
Councillor Perks to speak.
Thank you, Speaker. So, as you know, I have a motion. I'm moving that we delete recommendations 1, 2, and 4 and replace instead that City Council amend the Municipal Code Chapter 3, 4, 5 apartment buildings to require apartment building owners and operators to inform all current and prospective tenants of the rating of their apartment buildings and the evaluation used to create the rating. Effectively, we keep the ability to score buildings. We keep the commitment to the inspections and the inspection fees. We keep the rating. We simply don't post it on the building. I have been involved with Councillor Matlow and others on this since the idea first germinated, and I share the concerns and the passion that Councillor Matlow and tenant organizers have brought to this issue. But I asked myself, what is the purpose of putting a sign on the building? The people we are trying to protect are tenants who live in the building and prospective tenants who are considering moving into the building. They need to be informed. They absolutely need to be informed. My motion attempts to do that. Councillor Carroll got me thinking. It's, you know, tenants aren't coming forward enough. So some tenant organizers are saying you have to take the relationship away from it being the tenant versus the landlord, which is an unequal relationship. And I agree with that reasoning. I don't think posting a sign on a building changes the power relationship between people who own property and people who rent a place to live. Over the years, we have many times considered different tools for rebalancing that relationship. And we had an interesting deputation at the tenant committee that Councillor Fletcher chairs and Councillor Bradford and I sit on it, the renoviction committee. And a deputant there told us that in every neighborhood in Montreal, there's a community organization that provides organizing supports to tenants. Think of our Metro Tenant Federation having an office in every neighborhood. And it occurred to me, we do have a tool that gives tenants the power to take on landlords who are not achieving good quality buildings. It's the Tenant Defense Fund. And it occurred to me that when we come into the budget debate this year, we should look at greatly increasing the resources available through the Tenant Defense Fund so that tenants have power in their own hands to take on landlords who aren't filling requests to improve units. We should also consider some reforms to the property standards appeal committee that we operate to make that committee give tenants equal access. We should also consider whether we adequately resource municipal licensing and standards. So there are a whole lot of things we can do that rebalance the power relationship between tenants and landlords and use the tools available to the City of Toronto to make sure that tenants can speak for themselves rather than us presuming to speak for them by posting a color-coded sign on the building where they live. It just strikes me as an approach that is more committed to equity and justice than putting a label on a place where somebody lives. I've been struggling with this, and Councillor Matlow will remember I raised these concerns when we first proposed this approach. And at the end of the day, after talking to a lot of people who have lived as tenants most of their lives, I've just come to the conclusion that if our effort is to make sure tenants have power, this is the wrong way to do it.
Thank you. I want to remind members of council that we have 6 items left and we have to finish by 3:30. We do have questions for you, Councillor Perks. 3 minutes, clarification of the motion. Councillor Matlow.
Councillor Perks, given that this specific initiative has been approved by council 3 times, staff went out to consultation with whether it be groups like FMTA, Acorn, and any other tenant who wanted to engage in the process. And there was a full consultation. And then Acorn, FMTA, all those tenants engaged with staff, with my office, sure with others. And the result has been what we are considering today. Do you really think that it's right to just ignore all of that and dismiss it when honestly the only time I've ever heard about this stigma argument has either been, and I say this with respect, but in this room, or I've heard it from the lobbyists, I'm sure you've heard it too, right? Who went on this campaign about this. But we haven't heard it directly from those in this organization.
Councillor Matlow, your question, please. Clarification of the motion.
So
why do you believe it's right to do this?
Councillor Matlow's question, and I'm prepared to answer it, Speaker.
Okay.
First, Councillor Matlow, I need to correct your recollection. I raised this with you when you and I were sitting together on the Tenant Advisory Committee last term. I raised this concern with you there. The second point, you asked me if I'm concerned because council has already decided on this. This very morning, I voted on a motion you put in front of council because the city clerk said council reserves the right to change its mind. So that's your second point. As to your third point, you suggest that only lobbyists have mentioned this. I remind you again that I raised this with you personally at the very beginning of this process. As to whether or not I am ignoring the advice of some tenant advocacy organizations, I want to be very, very clear. Our job is to listen to what people are advising us and to ask critical questions about it and to think through the public policy implications and achieve what they are asking us to achieve. FMTA, for example, has repeatedly raised concerns about whether we adequately fund the tenant defense hotline. They've repeatedly raised questions about the performance of our property.
We're all in agreement on that.
I'm sorry, I'm answering your question.
Councillor Matlow, please don't interrupt Councillor Perks, and your time is up. Your time is up.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Councillor Perks. Councillor Carroll, 3 minutes, clarification of the motion.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand. I get that we're doing the municipal code piece, but I'm having trouble understanding how your very simplified motion, how it's going to insert itself into the power dynamic that exists between landlord and tenant. Well, the current tenant's in a red building where if he just has to go to them and say, guess what, we're a red building, in many cases, and he will say, and it's your fault because you don't put your food in Tupperware, and the power dynamic is still there. With the new tenant who has no rental history in Toronto and is just desperate to get a roof over their head, he says we're a red building and that's why the rent's what it is and take it or leave it, bye-bye. And the power dynamic doesn't change at all, versus the public facing of the sign that creates some sort of business problem for
Councillor Carroll, your motion, your question, please.
Yeah. Are you sure that your simplified motion is actually going to change that power dynamic?
No, we won't change the power dynamic just by this motion. No. And just one little thing of note, the motion says both to tell them the color and the evaluation on which the color is based. So they'll have more information. I agree with you completely that this program is not the way to change the power dynamic between tenants and landlords. A sign won't do it. I think you and I both know that. What I'm constrained though, because the way we make decisions here, you can only bring changes that fit the item that's in front of you. I can't, for example, attach a motion saying, let's triple the size of the funding for the tenant defense fund today. I can't do that. I wish I could, and if I could, I would. Nor can I get into the guts of how the administration of the Property Standards Appeal Tribunal works. But I know that step in the process of following through on a property standards violation notice can cause enormous delays. I've got a building in my ward where there have been outstanding property standards issues going back to the 1970s. And posting a sign doesn't fix that.
Thank you.
Okay, that's my question.
Okay, members, I want to remind you that we need to finish by 3:30. Councillor Ford, question.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Councillor, through you to Councillor Perks. So I think I'm going to be supporting your motion, Councillor, but my question around this is, so in terms of putting a sign up in the lobby, at least we know it's done. At least we know landlords are doing that. This way, I'm just trying to grasp in how you think we're going to ensure that landlords are distributing this to tenants. Like, how do we ensure that happens? And then, would there be any consequences in this if they don't? I don't know if that's an appropriate question for staff, but I would ask you.
Yeah, I appreciate the concern. I appreciate the concern. Let me answer it this way. Doing something because we can see that it's done doesn't mean we're solving a problem, right? Mm-hmm. And so I like I said, I've been struggling with this issue for a few years now, trying to and there are many aspects of it. And I just ask myself, so if our goal is to make sure that tenants and prospective tenants know, why wouldn't we tell them? And what is the purpose of telling everybody else, whoever visits or walks by that building? There's no purpose in it. In fact, there are potentially harms in it. Yes, administratively, it will be difficult to confirm that every prospective tenant has gets the information. It will be difficult to confirm that the landlord has told all the current tenants. There are ways of doing it. We could maybe send you, Councillor Ford, or some member of staff around as a secret shopper to find out if landlords are sharing that. There are ways of achieving it. I felt that I couldn't lay it out in detail today in a simple motion, but I have full confidence in municipal licensing and staff. If we give them a clear message today, this is what we want to achieve, they will figure out how to achieve it.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Bylaw, question.
Councillor Perks, I just want to make sure I'm reading your motion correct. So you still are saying to have a sign with information, but it's not a color sign, but a sign that has the percentage. If they get 50% or if they got 80%, it's still available in a visible location.
It's available in a visible location. Whether the location is outward facing or not, I don't know. The point is to make sure tenants know.
Okay.
And to make sure tenants know, but not to make this something that screams to everyone who comes to visit, or maybe someone who's making a delivery, or someone who's casually walking by or lives across the street. It's not their business.
And the program stays, I mean, you're not changing anything on the program. Criteria of waiting in MLS. Okay.
No.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry, Councillor Thompson, you had a question?
Quick one, Madam Speaker. So through you to Councillor Perks. So no scarlet letters or signs, is that correct?
That's my goal, Councillor.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I'll be supporting you.
Okay, so, let's put the motions on the screen. Councillor Perks's motion goes first. We'll ask for a recorded vote. Yes, recorded.
Councillor Layton, it appears to us that the vote has not been delivered to your screen. Can you refresh or otherwise advise us verbally of how you vote, sir?
Refreshing's bumped me off. I'll be voting in the affirmative, please.
Thank you. Councillor Cole, are you present and voting? Speaker, the motion carries. The vote is 16-4. Oh. Members, just stand by so we can display the vote.
Yeah, I see it.
We're just waiting to display the vote for the public. Just one moment, Speaker. Okay. Madam Speaker, we've just reviewed the remaining motions in light of the vote the council just took. And Councillor Matlow's motion 2A is the next motion. Part 1 of that motion is now redundant, but we believe that Part 2 of that motion is in order and as amended. In other words, once the meeting is over, when the minutes are prepared, the Part B of that motion, if it carries, will be amended in accordance with the decision council's just made, if you follow me. So we can put Part B to a vote.
Can we put that part on the screen? Did the members of council hear that? So what is it that we're voting on?
So, Speaker, just to reiterate, the next vote would be on Part 2 of Councillor Matlow's motion 2A, Part 2 as it may be amended by the action council just took.
Okay, is there, are members of council clear on what we're voting on?
I'm not, Madam Speaker. Which recommendations 1 to 5 are these now referring to, please?
Speaker, that's my recommendation to you is that the vote on Part 2 would be Part 2 as amended. And when we say as amended, what that means is that we will consolidate that in the preparation of the minutes and delete those portions of Part 2 that no longer apply. But I do believe, Speaker, that some parts of that part of the motion continue to apply.
Councillor Holliday, did you hear that?
For greater
I did. So if I understand, ignore the numbers and understand the spirit is that some recommendations will apply now. Sorry, some recommendations will apply in December and the others will apply in April.
Just for greater certainty, then, Madam Speaker, that is correct. As I look at this section, it does refer to the effective date for amendments to Chapter 354 and amendments to Chapter 441. As council has just deleted anything with respect to fees, then obviously that part of this motion does not survive. There's no need to amend Chapter 441 because the fees have not, other than in Rec 3, I'm advised, that's right.
Okay, is everyone okay? Hello, is everyone okay? Please show your hands. No, if you can, I just want to know if everyone's okay with the.
Speakers,
Yes,
Councillor Thompson here. I'm just still trying to digest this.
Yeah.
I wondered whether or not we could allow staff to take a moment in order to ensure that it could be fully structured in a way that presents us as members of council something a little more congruent for us to vote on, that we can see and be able to explain to our constituents. At this moment, I'm not able to explain that. I understand the issues around the date, but I think staff should just take the time to do it properly in order to allow the vote. So maybe we can hold this down and then allow them to do that and bring it
I
back.
agree, Councillor Thompson. Why don't we just take out the part that we're actually voting on? So let's hold the item down.
Sure.
Okay, it sounds like they want to do it now.
Okay, so can we see it again then, please?
Well, I don't know.
Or maybe have Mr. Elbridge just do a quick explanation again so that, I just want to make sure I understand what I'm voting on. That's all I'd like to do.
Okay, give us 30 seconds. Maybe some councillors, while we're waiting, could think about releasing some of these items, or they'll have to be, no, not to do it now, just for them to think about it. Or we'll have
Madam
to,
Speaker.
we'll have to send it to our next council meeting because like we still have a number of items here. So think about it in the next 30 seconds.
On a point of order, I understand it may not be precise procedure, but can we, if staff could offer a comment that these are acceptable or not acceptable to them, maybe that would make it easier for us?
We cannot start that, Speaker.
Bad
I'm
practice,
sorry.
bad practice. Don't open that door.
Okay, just hold on.
We're not going there.
Okay, just one sec. Just give the staff some time to digest, unless Councillor Matlow just wants to withdraw his motion.
Why don't we just refer that motion to staff for reporting back if there's any implications in having changed the other rating system? That's all.
That may be a good idea.
I'm happy to do that.
Well, just a sec. Staff is not recommending it.
Madam Speaker, maybe I'll just try one more time to explain what I think is the effect here, and then maybe that'll help. This motion by Councillor Matlow changes the in-force dates of the regime that Council is about to adopt. So in its original form, the committee recommendations, it was changing the in-force dates to different dates. So that proposition is still on the table. And it will just, the new dates would be when this regime that council has adopted by virtue of adopting Councillor Perk's motion. So I think the best way to say this, Madam Speaker, is that this is a motion which that changes the dates in which the various provisions come into force. They were all going
I can
to
live
come
with
into,
that, Speaker.
Yeah.
Okay, we're just spending a lot of time on this now. Councillor Thompson?
I was just saying that I concur, I can live with that. I'm good. I just wanted to the confirmation of the dates. I'm good now. Thank you, Mr. Elbridge.
Okay, so we're ready to vote on it then? Okay, so for the public, once the vote is taken and the meeting is over, the clerk will post the information for the public to have a better understanding on what we voted on and the timeline on the implementation. Yeah. Okay, so let's put it on the screen and let's vote. Okay, the motion's on the screen. Recorded vote. It's on the screen to vote on. I don't know. So,
Okay, Madam Speaker, Speaker, Part 2 of Motion 2A, as amended by the previous decision of Council, carries. The vote is 19-2.
now when we vote on the item, Councillor Holliday, you asked for, oh, we have two more motions? Okay, Matt Lowe, 2B. On favor? Show of hands? Carried. Okay, Councillor Holliday's motion? On favor? Show of hands? Carried. Okay, item is amended. On favor? Carried. Okay, we're finished that item. Do we have any quick releases before we go to the next item? Councillor Bradford? Well, I think that's from before. Does anybody want to release? Want to remind everyone, we have to finish by 3:30 today. All right,
I'll have a quick release very shortly, Madam Speaker.
okay. Next item is PH 19.11, Emergency Housing Action. Councillor Bylaw, questions to staff? It's here without a recommendation.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I do have questions of staff.
Okay. Can you put your name on the list, please, Anna? Sorry, Councillor Bylaw? Okay, thank you. So questions to staff?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Are the units that you're talking about in here on top of the winter housing plan that we approved last month?
Through the speaker to you, Deputy Mayor, yes, that's correct.
Okay, so last month we approved 400 extra shelter spaces, 220 supportive housing. This report identifies 150 units that could be implemented immediately because we have supports, correct?
Yes, through the speaker, that's correct.
And there's another 450 that you've identified that we have the capital funding, is that correct?
Through the speaker, so on the capital side for those 450, those are for TCHC properties. So they require minimal capital investment. And we have for the operating funding, 150 operating, enough for 150 of those to become supportive housing in the short term. We need additional operating to make the remaining of them fully supportive housing.
But for the 620 that you're asking us here, you're also asking for 47 million to do further acquisitions. So some of what you're proposing here is further acquisitions, correct?
Yes, that is correct. Yes, our aim is to set up a pipeline of supportive housing opportunities that we can bring forward, accelerate quickly, subject to receiving supportive housing dollars from other levels of government.
So, and you're saying that these acquisitions and these units could be done between 8 to 12 weeks if we had the supportive dollars from the other orders of government, other ways. We have 150. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. We identified a potential for an additional 510 units beyond the 150 if we had $12.24 million in operating. And we have a further 588 units coming forward next year, which need $14 million annual operating in order to become fully supportive. So we basically have a vastly increased pipeline of supportive housing, more than we had this year. The 220, we just need, our biggest constraint is the operating dollar.
So in your report, you mentioned that we actually have over 1,200 units that we have capital for, plus the 220 that was already in the winter plan, so 1,500 units, but what you're really, the issue here is the supports.
That's right. The units that we've opened this year, so Church Street and also the modular housing, we have secured supportive housing dollars for those units. We also, for next year, have sufficient support dollars for 150. It's really the balance of that. So, like I said, we've worked really hard as a staff team to identify capital opportunities for purchase, for acquisition, conversions, for more modular sites. What we are lacking is the support dollars to make that housing appropriate for those people who are living in shelters and out on the street with complex health needs.
Okay, but we also have to move quickly. So you are saying that you do have some of these acquisitions that are coming fast. And is also the other 538 units on the RHI program, was a prerequisite of the program that all units have to be delivered in 2021 as well? So these are, you've identified quick projects.
For the RHI, yes, it was a 1 year 1-year delivery from the point of approval, but no later than the 31st of December 2021. And following the request from Planning and Housing Committee, we went back to look at those units plus other units we had under consideration to see if we could further accelerate any of that investment to respond even more quickly than that 1-year timeline. Hence why we're identifying a number of potential opportunities that could be delivered within an 8 to 12-week period.
And you've started negotiations on these properties? Are you talking to property owners? I mean, how are the negotiations? Are some of them close to purchase and sale?
The discussions with the property owners are going well. We haven't finalized, we're still in a negotiation and also a due diligence phase, but we're confident that we can reach agreements with all of those, with the owners of those properties.
Okay, thank you.
So
that was your last question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Min Wong. Question?
Yeah, thanks. Recommendation number 14 references 5 properties. Why is there a specific recommendation for these 5 properties?
Let me just have a look at number 14. So it's really about ensuring that we have the necessary approvals and authorities to complete the purchases for those 5, that we can basically enter below market or nominal rent leases for 3 years with any of the nonprofits who we may want to operate those buildings.
But you're entering into more agreements than just 5. Why did you separate these out?
The 5 were identified because they relate to the supply that we think we could bring forward within that 8 to 12-week period. For the remaining properties that we have funded under RHI, which have to be complete by the end of the year, we actually have more time to go through a full and competitive procurement process with the nonprofit sector for those units. But if we are able to secure the operating funding as quickly as we would like and actually open those units within that 8 to 12-week period, we do not have the time to go through a full procurement process with the nonprofit sector for operations.
And is it true if you enter into any agreements that are more than $10 million in value that you have to come to council for specific approval?
Through the speaker, on the RHI report that we brought last month, we did get some additional approvals with regard to that, and I would also let Pat Matosa speak to the approvals in relation to the purchase of those sites.
Through Madam Speaker, that is correct, Abby. So we do have delegated authority from last month's report to transact specifically on RHI units. On facilities for the RHI program that we'll also bring back to council once the transactions are complete. As we only have a year to actually do the actual acquisition and completion of any construction, our timelines are very tight.
So these agreements that we're entering into, especially for the purchases of property, once the funding runs up and the pandemic ends, and the funding runs up from the other levels of government, we'll still have these properties, but there'll be no operating funding assigned to it. Is that, do I have that right?
So the new kinds of money available from the federal government enable us to do what we wanted to do for a long time, which is bring forward supportive housing that's fully funded. So we are able to complete purchases of buildings and have those owned by us and put out on long-term leases to the nonprofit sector. In all cases for supportive housing, ongoing operating funding is required, and very often provincial and federal governments don't provide us with very long-term funding frameworks for operating. Right now, it's been offered in very, very short time chunks, kind of 6 months, 3-6 months, maximum of a year. Ideally, we would be receiving confirmation of operating in at least a 3 to 5 year window to give certainty and predictability to our nonprofit partners who can then plan their staffing component, their training, and everything that's required to run these buildings really well. So we would much rather
sorry. The short form to my answer then is no. You don't have the funding over a long-term basis, and once the funding runs up from the other levels of government, it's in fact unstable funding.
It is currently unpredictable. We do currently have, though, sufficient for 150.
And what's your projected shortfall if that funding doesn't come through?
So in the report, we've identified that we can move ahead on the 150 right now. In order to move forward on the balance of the 510, we need an additional 12.24 million in operating funding. And then for the remaining RHI properties that are due to come forward in 2021, we need, in 2021, we need 3.3 million in operating funding. And then for every year after that, that would require 14 million.
Okay.
Total 14 million
Okay,
for the whole nut?
That was your last question.
The total for 1,248 units is around $30 million per year in annual funding. 30 million, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Holiday.
Thank you, Speaker. So the report includes a number of delegated authorities. Number 6 is to go and acquire or lease property with a cap of 15 million per. And then there's some more delegated authority to go and sole source or non-competitive procure in number 11, number 13. Can you tell me more about the properties? It sounds like it's a highly developed list, and just listening to the questions. I've had this report for, 24 hours here, and there's no appendix or attachment. Where are these properties?
So we did a lot of work as staff to prepare the RHI submission that went in at the end of November, and in going and planning for the $203 million that we had been allocated by the federal government. And we identified through that process many sites for new modular housing and also many sites for potential acquisition. Some of those sites were not eligible to be submitted under RHI, or we chose not to at that time. So when we were asked to kind of further expedite housing as a result of the pressures that we're experiencing right now, we looked again at the work that we had done to see if there were any further opportunities that we might bring forward and spend the money that we had already allocated, the 47 million that was already a pivot from shelter funding over to housing. And so we've started that process of exploring those properties, the acquisitions and conversions with owners, and we're going through a due diligence and negotiation process, but we're not ready for those properties to become public because we haven't completed the discussions with owners.
Who knows where they are? The staff?
The staff are working on the sites. We have staff in Create TO and also CRAM and legal and finance, all of the relevant departments at the city. And we're also engaging with councillors and their offices when appropriate as we get closer to reaching a deal on those properties.
So some councillors know where they are.
We've been working with, as we're able to kind of gain more certainty on some of those properties on RHI, we have been engaging councillors who are relevant.
So that's a yes.
Discussions.
Okay, and now are any of these developments, so I understand there's a difference between buying a condo unit, or whatever, some existing piece of housing stock, but are any of these development sites, like places that have no building and there's a move to build something there that wasn't there before?
For the expedited housing that we've identified in the 8 to 12 week period, no, that's not the case.
Of course. No, but I'm talking about the stuff that we're delegating you for, right? There's all kinds. It looks like we're delegating you up to $15 million of property. And if I've got the recommendations, I understand them correctly, and we're giving you delegation to go and to non-competitively procure construction. What types of projects are these? You understand, we're giving you a blank check. I need to understand what you're asking
If I
for.
can, Councillor Holiday, it's Pat Matosa. Through Madam Speaker, the majority of sites are existing locations. The ones that would be ground up simply modular, and as you know, we're just about to complete 2 modular projects, and we've done it in a 6 to 8 month time frame. So all from a perspective, it's the sites that we are looking at and working on are sites that we can convert within a year, and the sites that were selected for modular are sites that we know we can complete in 2021.
So basically, it's a repeat of at least the modular components are a repeat of what we've seen this year, where it's rapidly built within months as opposed to years. And we've had this discussion before. Is there anything else planned? Are there any buildings, notable developments, things that would normally go through a planning process on this list?
Not specific to this program, no, other than the modular.
Okay, so how much of this are we talking about that is modular versus things that already exist? And of the things that already exist, how many of them are things like, motels that you want to convert, some other shape or form that's going to change a use?
That was your last question.
So of the 1,200 units, should we be able to move forward on all of them? There are about 500 of them are modular sites, and the remaining are acquisitions and conversions, largely of hotels and motels and buildings that can be converted into residential.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you. I just want to thank you for such a quick turnaround, being asked for this report, and all of those who worked with you to provide this. The 2 things I want to ask you about. One is, how critical is it to have support dollars in order to achieve these? Can we simply have locations and no support dollars to move people into units?
There is much experience across Canada of how successful housing first and supportive housing models are to house people without a home who are experiencing homelessness. All of that requires a couple of things. It actually requires a home for them to move into, and it requires the support dollars and the staffing necessary to connect them to health supports, and also other types of housing support. So both of those things are essential, and we have focused on trying to create a pipeline of actual homes that could be opened within a short time period, and we are unable to fully utilize that list of properties unless we're able to further secure support dollars from the other levels of government.
So
if I could just add, Councillor Fletcher, it's Marianne. I'll just add on to what Abby has said. We are focusing on trying to move people who have been using the shelter system as housing into housing, as it's more effective for them and certainly more efficient for us. And so those supports are critical.
Thank you. So really, we're doing our part in finding the locations, and now we are looking for the other levels of government. Particularly, this must be the province, because we're looking for support, but there's federal dollars, we'll take those too. So we have to match up and march together in order to accomplish this. That's what I'm understanding this says. I'm very interested in number 2, that the city manager establish a housing and homeless action table with ministry, long-term care, children, many different community groups. I just wonder how realistic that is. Has that happened before? I don't know if the city manager's on the line, or Ms. Bond, you just want to answer that one.
So again, through the speaker, I mean, certainly.
Oh, there he is. Hi. Good morning.
We're familiar with the partners that are suggested on the roundtable, and I know you'll recall that there's been some good work on evolving with University Health Network, who we've reached out to, who I think is going to be a very important partner, not just in terms of the work itself, but efforts to engage the province and maybe federal government and funding. This model that we're talking about, having a direct connection to the hospital system, is important. And I can speak from my own experience as a former housing director and CEO of a housing association. The wraparound services to help people who have a whole array of challenges is so critical, and to not have it in place is a real problem. And so hence why this model is not just about the bricks and mortar, it is about those support services, and who is providing them is going to really matter.
So this approach to bring this table together, have we tried that before in order to, with a hospital component and a LINS component, in order to truly get the commitment for the support that's necessary in order to open this? Are you confident that they'll come together, or are we just a pipe dream for us?
I can't speak to the past, as you know, in terms of what efforts have been made in this regard. So Julie may want to say something, but I think it really begs the question: what is the alternative? We don't have the whole array of services that are necessary for dealing with very complex human issues. These other institutions, be it not-for-profit or hospital institutions, have those abilities. So I think it's the right approach going forward, and I think this kind of collaboration will send an important message to our provincial and federal partners in terms of how to do it. Is now the will to financially support doing it.
And how quickly could you put that up?
Councillor Fletcher, sorry, that was your last question. Thank you.
I think he wants to answer that question, Speaker, about how fast this could happen.
Councillor Carroll.
Well, I mean,
Councillor
it has to
Carroll.
happen now.
Sorry, I thought we were going to hear the answer first. Okay.
Yeah,
well, through the speaker, if I can, just to finish off that last important question. I mean, the proposal, I mean, as soon as we get direction, I mean, there are already linkages to these groups. I mean, Julie can certainly attest to that. I think having this table and knowing how quickly the timeline that we have in front of us is, we're, I think, pulling it together and getting it to focus and start to organize the services, but more importantly, send a message to the province about service support dollars. I think it's the right group. It has to come together as quick as we can.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry to the city manager and Councillor Fletcher. I thought that you had finished your answer. Sorry about that. Councillor Carroll, question.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I'm wondering if I could just continue that line of questioning that Deputy Mayor Min Wong had to Ms. Bond. Maybe we can finish it to the comfort level. So the operating dollars is the key piece. We end up, if we achieve all of this, we end up with a total $30 million operating burden. I'm wondering if we can look at this. We're doing this now. Wouldn't you agree? We're meeting needs now that are part of the pandemic impact and all the ancillary impacts to that. But we're also addressing some unmet capacity that was already in the system in trying to achieve this.
Yes, and I'll speak to the housing component. I'm sure Marianne will add to the pressures that she's experiencing on the shelter side. But I think the compounding pressures of an ongoing housing and homelessness crisis with a pandemic have really exacerbated the situation for us. We want to be able to return our shelter system to an emergency system and move people from it into housing, which is the right place for them to be connected to housing and health support so that they can live their best lives as we all want to. And so that's why it's so important for us to create this supply, create this potential to layer on those supports when they become available.
Right. And if we have enough of this model, if there are people cycling through supportive housing and the shelter system is doing what it was really designed to do, we can really only be sure of dollars. If we get a commitment, it's sort of politically tied. So we're never going to get, you will have those operating dollars for 40 years. But if we can get 3 to 5 year commitments, isn't it also true that our goal is by working across the entire housing initiative and shelter and supportive housing initiatives, that our goal is there could come a time when we don't need the supply we need right now. And if that's the case, then I think that the comfort level people would be looking for is it clear to our various partners, not-for-profit partners, operators, is it clear that if we evaluate an improvement over the years and we don't think we need to be involved in this, that there would be, at a certain point in time, it would be our intention not to go looking for as high a quantum of funding, but to move on to the other parts of the housing envelopes. So that $30 million operating burden needn't be infinite. It could be a number of years while we're addressing the housing crisis and trying to stabilize it.
Through the speaker to you, Councillor, in our housing plan over the next 10 years, we identified the need for 18,000 supportive housing units. We have many people on a wait list. This is really our attempt to accelerate and try and deliver that supply sooner within that 10-year window. I think we would all welcome a time when we had sufficient housing and the right kind of housing for everyone living in our city. And so we're having to take multiple efforts, not just in relation to supportive housing, but also things like exploring a vacant homes tax, which will impact our vacancy rate, and a whole variety of different programs and policies, because we are some way away from every person in the city having the appropriate and affordable place to live.
Right, we're some way away, but the goal is invest in these things now so that we can get to the point where we really are able to put the resources into the wisest places. And we'd be able to assure other orders of government that while we seem to be continually asking them, our goal is to appropriately house people so that the burden actually could balance out and stabilize for all orders of government.
Yeah, certainly
the
the
goal?
actions, yeah, certainly our actions that we're taking across the whole continuum on housing now and other supportive housing could have the effect of giving everybody that lives and works in the city a place, a home that they can hold on to and make their lives here. The issue for us around supportive housing is that it is a critical investment to do as early as possible because of all of the other impacts we're seeing about us not taking action. So that's why we're bringing this forward and saying, look, we think we can, and I think this is what hopefully is attractive to the other levels of government in coming to that table to talk about support dollars, is because we're saying, look, we have the potential to create 1,200 homes next year. All we need, that's the greatest amount of supportive housing we have created in a long time. What we need from you is to partner with us around the operating dollars. And if we can do that, we will collectively save ourselves millions of dollars in emergency responses, through like emergency rooms, repeat offending, a whole variety of things will be impacted by our ability to provide housing, supportive housing for people.
Thank you. That was your last question.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Councillor Layton.
Thank you very much. Most of my questions are to the General Manager of Shelter Support and Housing. And first, I'll just say, Ms. Bedard, thank you so much for all the hard work that you're doing and the remarkable amount of additional spaces you've been able to identify through this past 10 months. I want to get a better understanding of that, if I could. How many people have been rehoused since March?
Through the chair, we have found new housing for just over 2,000, just under 3,000 people since the beginning of the pandemic.
And how much of that is in new shelter space? And how much is that is in TCHC? And how much of that is in hotels?
So that number that I just said is all in housing. Those are people that we've been able to move into permanent housing as a result of very aggressively doing rapid rehousing.
So how many hotel rooms are we currently occupying, or as part of our shelter system?
We have about, let me see, we have 2,400 people who are staying in hotel rooms right now as a part of our COVID response.
And how many are in additional shelter capacity? Or is it still the, sorry?
Last night we had 3,231 people in the base shelter system, 297 in our respite programs, and 2,493 in our COVID programs. So we sheltered a total of 6,021 people last night.
Thank you. Do we know how many people are still not in housing or in our shelter system? How many people are sleeping rough currently?
We have an estimate. We have two ways of doing that, Councillor. We do a street needs assessment every couple of years. Our last street assessment said that we had about 530 people staying outside. Our Streets to Homes teams and partner agencies are also on the road 24/7, connecting to people in encampments. They're currently monitoring 80 encampments, and within those 80 encampments, there are about 400 tents.
Thank you. Do we have, and now switching gears a little bit, do we have any idea how many vacant hotel rooms exist in the city of Toronto at any given time? Do you have any measure of that? How many additional vacant hotel rooms there are in Toronto?
I don't know whether my colleague Pat Matozzo has a sense. He knows who we've tried to talk to.
Through you, Madam Speaker, to Councillor Layton. No, we don't have a sense of how many vacant rooms in hotels there are.
And when you're negotiating sites like additional hotel capacity, are the owners being open-minded? Are they coming to the table? Why is it that we might have so many hotel rooms sitting vacant that we're not using to try to house the 530, 600 people that are currently not in housing?
Early on, when we started in March, when we started the COVID pandemic program to assist SSHA in finding hotels, we identified a sufficient number at that point. But as time has elapsed, it is becoming very much more difficult. And to be blunt, they're just refusing to lease hotels to us.
So we have hotel owners with buildings sitting empty or with fairly low occupancy that are refusing to negotiate leases with the City of Toronto.
That is correct, and I think a lot of it stems from the uncertainty as to when they'll be able to reopen. So I think that's a big driver as to why they won't lease to the city, because they're waiting to see when the province will reopen. I think that's a big contributor as to why they're not leasing to us.
Why don't we compel? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Abby. No, please.
Through the speaker to you, Councillor, I just wanted to add that the challenges that we have faced with leasing have not necessarily been replicated when we've approached people for purchase. So the shift to housing here and these units that we've explored are really for us acquiring and converting, and we've had a lot more success there.
So let me ask one more question. Why can't we compel them to lease us these rooms if people's lives are on the line? Why can't we compel them?
Councillor Lane, that was your last question.
That may be a question for the solicitor, Councillor Lane.
Go ahead, Wendy.
Sorry, the city does have an expropriation power. It's the process for expropriation is dictated by provincial legislation, and the process does require that the city take a variety of prescribed steps, and it would take, generally speaking, it takes 12 to 18 months to go through those steps. So it's not an emergency power. Other levels of government do have emergency property acquisition powers, but municipalities do not.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Bailao to speak. You held the item down. You can go to speakers.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As we've heard from staff, the City of Toronto has really taken extraordinary actions during.
Do you have a
pandemic.
motion, Councillor?
I do. I'm moving staff report.
Okay.
Through the pandemic, we've created 2,300 spaces in new temporary shelter and hotel programs for physical distance. The winter plan that we just approved last month will bring another 620 spaces. That's from December to February. We have staff commitments and the approval of this council to bring these units in 3 months and to provide some housing and some extra shelter capacity. So today I move the staff report, which I have to show my deepest gratitude to staff. This was a report that was asked last week at Planning and Housing. And in about a week, staff really came together to work on a path forward. What they were asked is, how can we expedite even further housing over the next 8 weeks? And we know that the solution is housing. We have committed to doing that shift when we approach the other orders of government with our 3,000 spaces, 1,000 modular, 1,000 acquisitions, and 1,000 housing allowances. They've started to work with us. The rapid housing approach is a result of that advocacy that we have been doing. So what we have here in front of us is a realistic, pragmatic, attainable plan to, in the next 8 to 12 weeks, to bring another 660 units and be able to house people that are experiencing homeless right now, creating more capacity also in our shelter systems. Madam Speaker, this will be done through acquisitions. This will be done with a plan that we have on the capital side that is funded. On top of a funded plan for 150 units of modular still coming this year in 2021, 538 units for right to housing with $203 million that came from the federal government. And we still are waiting for our project stream where we submitted another potential 500 units to be done. So in 2020 and 21, we will for sure have over 1,500 units of supportive housing, maybe even more as we hear until the end of the month from the project stream on the right to housing. What staff have clearly demonstrated here, and as we all know from different shelters and supportive housing that have not gone the way that we wanted, and Roehampton is an example, the Vaughan is an example. We know that support services are essential for the success of these families and for the success of communities welcoming these housing, this kind of housing in the communities. What we're asking here is for a strong endorsement of this plan so that we can continue to work with our partners in the province and the federal government by asking them $48 million that is requesting in supportive services in order to bring almost 2,000 units of supportive housing, 660 of them in the next 8 to 12 weeks, having immediate impact, bringing people inside and having supportive permanent housing for them, which we all know this is the solution. We reiterate our ask for 1,000 housing allowances, and we do ask for some changes in the rapid rehousing program, which we know there's a phase 2 coming. Madam Speaker, I think that the staff was very clear in creating a path forward. I ask my colleagues to support this report. We need to ask and continue to work the other orders of government in a cooperative way to deliver housing, and in particular supportive housing, to the people and the City of Toronto. I think that you all agree with me that we need to be focused, we need to be practical and support our staff on what they're asking us. And right now, they're asking us to support, I think, a path that will show 660 units between 8 and 12 weeks.
Thank you. We do have a question for you. Councillor Holliday, 3 minutes, clarification of the motion.
Yes, thank you, Speaker. Recommendation number 6 recommends delegated authority to staff to go and acquire property. Are you aware of any of the property locations that staff are looking at?
I'm not aware of all the locations. I'm aware of at least one location.
Can you share that with council?
I would prefer not to, because there is business implications as they're negotiating with the owner.
Okay.
As
Who
you
else?
can imagine, as any business transaction. I believe that staff have contacted local councillors. The reason I know about one property is because.
Who else knows about them?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure, councillor.
You mentioned that staff had contacted local councillors. So
That's
you
what
don't...
I heard them responding to you,
Okay.
right? On your questioning, that's what I believe they told you.
Okay. How about another part here talks about delegating staff to go and acquire non-competitive agreements for construction and so on. Are you knowledgeable of any negotiations or work or consideration of any of the contracts?
No, councillor. I think what staff were asked was, how can we ensure keeping on our approach that we need to invest in supportive housing instead of just investing in shelters and investing in hotels, which is a lot more expensive. I don't know if you recall that, right now it's about $6,000 a month to have somebody in a shelter versus $2,400 in supportive housing. What we're saying is this is the investment that needs to be done, because at the end of the day, it's actually more economic. So what tools do you need to make sure that we're housing and creating supportive housing as fast as possible?
So
These
who
were the
on
things that
council
staff is asking us.
who on council knows any of the information that is being delegated here? So properties or non-competitive agreements with entities to do construction. Does anybody have any knowledge that you know of any of this stuff?
I believe that staff have the knowledge on the properties, and with the contracts, you're delegating that authority, councillor. I don't have the knowledge of what work will be needed in these properties, but what I do know is that this is a path forward to create the much needed supportive housing, which is a lot more economical than keeping and humane than keeping people in shelters or out on the street.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Perks to speak.
Thank you, Speaker. I have a motion. I move that City Council direct the Executive Director of the Housing Secretariat in consultation with appropriate staff to continue seek vacant hotel and apartment units until every person in Toronto in need of accommodation has been offered housing. And 2, City Council requests the federal and provincial governments to provide the City of Toronto with the necessary tools to offer housing to every person in need of accommodation, including the expropriation of vacant hotel and apartment units under the authority of Section 3.1C of the Federal Emergencies Act, funding for the necessary social supports for housing Torontonians, funding to acquire and or lease the necessary units, and approvals or funding for necessary harm reduction measures. Speaker, everyone on this council, everyone in Toronto, believes that every human being needs a home to live with in dignity. They need safe and secure housing. There's not a one of us who doesn't believe that. The question is, are we doing enough to achieve that? Before I get to that, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the incredible work that has been done by Toronto City staff. The number of people that we have housed this year and the current report proposes to house is truly remarkable. And I want to acknowledge also the role that Mayor John Tory and Deputy Mayor Anna Bailao have played in achieving it. Everyone at the City of Toronto has stepped up and done remarkable work. But the fact of the matter is, this report shows that it's not enough. That the desire that every Torontonian has, that all of our sisters, brothers, neighbors, friends, family have access to safe, secure housing has not been achieved by this report. And it's because we don't have the tools. Let's take a moment and reflect on some things that were said in answers to questions asked by Councillor Layton. Right now, 3,200 people are staying in shelters in the City of Toronto. 300 people are staying in respite care, and 500 people are sleeping on the streets. That's 4,000 Torontonians. The report you have in front of you says that by the end of March, we can provide housing for 500 households, and that by the end of next December, we can provide housing for 1,250 households. In other words, the plan that we're about to approve will leave 2,500 households facing another winter, having to choose between living in a shelter or living in a tent. It's not enough. It is absolutely not enough. Now, a couple of arguments have been made about why we shouldn't do this. The first is that we can't expropriate quickly enough. Let's be clear how that would work. Today, city staff are aware of over 1,000 hotel units, I know that much, that are vacant. I've made them aware of a building in my ward where there are between 150 and 200 rental units that are vacant. Together, we could come up with enough to house everybody. We could submit that list to the federal government in days. The Premier of Ontario, the way the legislation works, would need to say that he concurs with the idea of the federal government using their emergency powers. He could write that letter today. The federal cabinet, the federal legislature does not need to meet. This is a cabinet decision. They could meet next week, launch the emergency powers, and pass the necessary regulations to begin expropriation or temporary use proceedings for the properties that are necessary. By the beginning of January, we could be beginning to do the work to get the supports in place, because we would need the Premier and the Prime Minister to listen to our demands on supports as well. We could be housing people by the end of this winter. By the end of this winter, we could be achieving what all of us have voted for, which is the simple, humane acknowledgement that housing is a human right that every person in our city should enjoy. I have a lot more to say on this, but I see I'm running out of time. I thank you for your consideration. This is one of the most important decisions we will make collectively as a council during our term of office.
Thank you.
Please support my motion.
Thank you. Councillor Perks, we do have a question for you. Councillor Ainsley, clarification of the motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Councillor Perks, could you clarify or explain, elaborate a bit about the second part where you talk about asking the federal government for powers to expropriate? My understanding was
I'm sorry, Councillor, you've cut out. Hello?
We've received a... Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you, yeah.
Now, okay.
Oh, now I can't. Speaker, I'm in your hands. I don't know what to do.
Ainsley, can you turn your video off?
Can you hear me now, Councillor Perks?
Yes.
Yes.
So can you clarify the second part of your motion about expropriation? I understand we're getting a what I'll call a substantial amount of money from the federal government for housing, and the other largest city in Canada, Vancouver, is also not going down the expropriation route. They're looking at getting loans or grants for housing from the federal government. So I'm a little concerned if that's what Vancouver is doing and that's what we've been doing to date, that the federal government wouldn't agree to expropriation powers for Toronto.
Well, first, just to be clear about the process, I'm not asking the federal government to give us the power to expropriate. I'm asking them to employ their power. They have the ability under the Emergency Act to move for the requisition, use, or disposition of any property to assist in dealing with the emergency. The reason why I want to go that way is very simple. The report you have in front of you says that even if we do everything that is laid out within the city's powers today, we will have upwards of 3,000 people still living in shelter or on the streets by the end of this winter, and we will have upwards of 2,500 people still living in shelters or on the streets at the beginning of next winter. As to whether the federal or provincial government will do this, let's be very, very clear. Just yesterday, Mayor Tory gave a remarkable speech on an issue that was in front of us and talked about over time how his position had evolved. It's not the first time he's done it. It's one of the things I admire about the mayor. In moments of it, he will reflect and change on his opinion. You can't get the federal government or the provincial government to change their opinion on this if you don't ask for it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you.
Question for the mover, Councillor Pasternak.
Well, can you put your name up, please?
I'm sorry, I'm locked out, or
Wow.
I'm just having a trouble at the moment, but just very quickly.
Okay, count, well, I need your name on the list. Just one sec. Okay, hold on. We put it on the list. Three minutes clarification of the motion.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Councillor Perks, I've been looking everywhere for any kind of legal precedent in this country where a body of government has expropriated individual hotel rooms. I'm just wondering whether you found something that I couldn't.
I'm not certain. I haven't checked. I know that there have been moments of emergency when the federal government has used emergency powers to legislate. It was different legislation. This legislation came into effect in 1998, I believe, or 88. So you would have to go back to previous laws that they had before this one. And I know for a fact that they've expropriated property, for example, during World War II. So it is very clear. Further, the general expropriation powers that even the city has or the province has, not the emergency ones. I'm aware of an example in my ward right now where Metrolinx is expropriating the parking garage of an apartment building in order to build pedestrian access between the UP Express and the Dundas West subway station. So expropriation is a very, I won't say common, but it's used often enough that we understand how it works.
I guess my other question is, sometimes these are emergency rapid response ideas that you're putting forward, but
yes,
expropriation can be a messy, legal, court-based, drawn-out process. I fail to see how your motion is going to expedite helping the homeless.
Well, allow me to explain that. There are the general expropriation powers, which you're familiar with, that are messy. And as the mayor described, I think it was 2 days ago, it can take 12 months to 18 months to accomplish. That's why there's a separate piece of legislation, which is the Federal Emergencies Act, that allows governments in moments of crisis to move faster. And you literally, the federal cabinet, with the concurrence of the province of Ontario, said, we think it's an emergency that people are having to choose between going into a congregate setting and they're afraid because there have been outbreaks of catching COVID, or sleeping outside in sub-zero temperatures and risking freezing to death, or as we've seen, catching fire, that's an emergency of sufficient magnitude to say to people in a society as wealthy as ours, that if you are sitting on vacant hotel or apartment building units while people are dying on our streets, we are going to put them to use as housing. It can happen in a matter of days. Now, I know it's longer than that because we would need to do some work to condition the units and train staff or hire staff to provide supports. And I absolutely take the point on supports, but the legislative framework is there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Holiday to speak.
Madam Speaker, I'll be really brief. I'm actually going to support the majority of the report. I'm going to ask for a separated vote on the delegation of authority to go and procure the properties. And I'm going to ask for a separated vote on the non-competitive elements. There are two of them. And the reason I say is this, I perhaps my questioning of the mover and others was a little strong, and if I regret that I sounded aggressive on that, but I wanted to make the point though that this is a very, very difficult report to digest. It is brought to us in a very, very short span of time. It came yesterday. It is talking about multiple millions of dollars and is talking about physical changes in the city. I feel very strongly to make an informed decision. I'd like to see these pieces through the stages. I would prefer to approve the acquisition of the properties through the due course, right? It goes through the General Government Licensing Committee. We look at them, figure them out, and away they go. And with respect to non-competitive procurements, right? This is an interesting public policy question before council. How urgent is urgent? What drives when you need to run out there and do a non-competitive procurement? I know some members of council say it's an emergency out there. It's a COVID emergency. There's a homeless emergency. On and on and on and on. But I think there is some judgment to be applied as to how quick an emergency is and what the public policy and the public benefit cost is on that. My preference is to slow this down a little bit, and go through some of the process that we need to go through. And so that's why I'm going to ask for a separated vote on those particular items. I don't say that I have a lack of confidence in staff in them doing good work, the right work, the analytics. But I think as a member of council to do an informed vote, I need a little more time and information on this, more than 24 hours. And I really would like to know what the properties are, because from my questions, I understand that they've put a lot of effort into this. And it would be helpful to know what it is that we're authorizing them to go and get. Not to say that they may not be good choices, and not to say that I wouldn't be entirely satisfied if I knew all the answers. So maybe it's maybe a process issue that I wish to raise, Madam Speaker. But I thank you and members of council for listening, and I hope we can do this a little bit better the next time these type of ideas come forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Layton to speak.
How urgent is urgent? I want you to just reflect on that statement from the last speaker just for a moment. How urgent is urgent? We heard from city staff that we have 3,000 people in shelters last night, 300 people in respites, and 550 feel safe enough to go indoors because of the emergency that we're under. We go out there every day and tell people to stay home. Well, 4,000 people don't have a home to go to. And they're sleeping in cots on floors, they're sleeping in congregate settings in shelters, or they're sleeping in tents on the street. And maybe some councillors don't see the urgency as much as others who are responding to requests, responding to pleas, responding to cries for help from the individuals that are experiencing this epidemic in a far more serious way than others in our city. How urgent is urgent? Well, it was urgent enough that our city staff went out and with Herculean effort were able to rehouse 3,000 people. But the problem of homelessness in this city has been growing exponentially through this epidemic, and it's highlighted, I think, the it's been building for decades. You know, every government has some blame that can be placed on them for this. But let's not take this time to point fingers. Let's acknowledge that we need to collectively, in every level of government, take every step that is possible in order for us to ensure that there's a roof over everyone's head this winter, that we're respecting people's concerns about congregate settings, and instead of going the traditional route of opening up the armories and opening up respite sites, that we're finding people safe places, not only from the cold, but also from COVID. Now, we heard that the city has gone out and has tried to negotiate leases with vacant hotels, 1,000 rooms sitting empty, but we have been at least 1,000 rooms sitting empty, but we haven't been able to do so because they won't lease them to us. And we don't have the power to act quickly enough to ensure that we fill those vacant rooms with people, that we give people a chance through this. Our staff, again, have taken enormous steps, and the mayor and Councillor Bailao, but we don't have that tool that the federal government has to actually go in and say, it's urgent. How urgent? Urgent. How much of an emergency? An emergency that could see hundreds of people die if we don't start to address this issue of the lack of faith within our system right away. Councillor Perks is a pathway to that. And despite their Herculean efforts, I've put together a plan, but as we've heard, it's not enough and it's not fast enough. And we need more tools in our toolbox. So I'd ask you all to consider supporting Councillor Perks' motion in order for us to explore every tool possible to help us through this. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, members, I wanted to get this item done before lunch. Councillor Carroll, you have your name up to speak.
Yes,
Councillor
Madam
Carroll?
Speaker. Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. I listened very carefully to Councillor Perks' motion because I'd heard it was coming, and I thought, what an extreme thing. And here it arrives, and there's nothing extreme about it. It asks staff to keep seeking accommodation until we've housed all of those who aren't housed. It asks other orders of government to use special powers that they have to help us do that. How in heaven's name would you not want to take that position? That's all it's saying. We don't know what the outcome of it will be, but why wouldn't you want to take that position? You know, earlier in the council session, Madam Speaker, we had a motion come before us that very quickly put the divide between downtown and the suburbs in sharp relief. So much so that the motion ended up being withdrawn, because that's a thing that exists between us. But on this, there is no divide. There are people dying in drug-related overdoses in an emergency shelter in my ward, north of the 401. There are people sleeping by the Don River in my ward, north of the 401. And I don't for one second believe that that's not happening on the Humber River as well. This is now an issue for all of us. And people are literally dying because we didn't meet this need before this pandemic. And so this is a position that we should all want to take, whether we can achieve it or not. Here's the good news. I honestly believe, I I fully believe that right now, more than any other time, we have the perfect team that if we did achieve these permissions and these accommodations, we have the right staff team to actually be able to deal with that, to have the capacity to deal with it. We have the right city manager, the right head of SSHA, the right housing secretariat. We have the right team that if we had this capacity, they would use it. And all of the dollars and cents that we use over and over again to immediately address the fact that we haven't met these housing needs and we have to now throw emergency cash into the street to deal with that, those dollars start to begin to be used wisely instead of just throwing it in the street to respites and more shelter beds and more shelter beds and more shelter beds. We'd be doing the thing we need to do to properly accommodate people and then make changing and shifting where those people are and what their housing type is and what their own personal capacity is as part of our recovery and rebuild for the next decade. We need that. And in a city such as Toronto, why in heaven's name wouldn't a premier and a prime minister need that also and want to make it happen? Because we can stand here and say we honestly have the team in place that can do this for you. No one would get a black eye. Everyone would be able to say they finally did it if we set out to do it. And while I had my druthers about this motion, it came down to a simple thing that Councillor Perks said in answer to one of our questions. If you don't ask, the other orders of government never even contemplate it, let alone give it. Why would you not want to ask for this right now? Those are my comments, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Last speaker, Mayor Tory.
Speaker, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank our staff. I think we all do agree, and there's different points of view being represented around I was going to say around the chamber, but around the screen, that it is not satisfactory in particular to have people living in the encampments. I think we all agree on that. It is not safe. It is not healthy. It's not legal. But the first two are the more important of the two. And so the question then becomes, what can we do about that group of people first and foremost, because they're people who are living outside at a time of year when we just, make every effort through Streets to Homes and other things we do on an ongoing basis to try to ensure that's not the case. I do want to commend the staff. I want to commend in particular one of our colleagues, Deputy Mayor Anna Bailao, because they worked hard to come up with a plan here that is meant to address this. I think it was meant to address it, I believe, consistent with the wishes not of the mayor or a group of councillors, but the whole council basically didn't see the addition of thousands more shelter beds last year, let alone this year, as being the right answer. That we all knew that you could go on doing that, but it was not going to provide a satisfactory longer-term answer to address this challenge that we have in front of us, which is the overall housing challenge, including homelessness, is the number one challenge that I think we heard about at the time of the last election that has been in front of us since. We've done a lot to try and address it, but clearly not enough yet. I think now the economy is rivaling that as an issue, but it's still the top issue. So I want to thank the staff for their enterprise. I want to thank them for their sense of urgency because this came together in the last short while. I want to thank them for the fact that they did some very, very sensible things, which I think is one of the reasons why I commend this report to you and ask you to support it, including, for example, the use of vacant TCHC units, which we discuss constantly with the TCHC because it's a real challenge for them, believe it or not, in a city that's desperately short of housing to actually make use of some of these units because people choose not to occupy them or to accept them sometimes when offering. I think one of the things that's been lost in all of this, as we've discussed, whether Councillor Perks, and I'll address that in a moment, is that the essence of this report in terms of achieving more than just the initial tranche of units, the essence of what's needed here as well is operating funding from the other governments. And I guess I would come down to saying this. First of all, with respect to Councillor Perks' motion, and I will support part one of it, but I will not support part two. And I've read the Emergencies Act and you should have a look at it. And I think what you have to focus on though is sometimes not what the words say and the fact, yes, it's a tool that's there. Ask yourself this question. with all the discussions that's gone on during the pandemic about whether or not the federal government would ever use that to declare an emergency for other reasons related to the health pandemic, they've not done so. It's been a subject of great debate and controversy. And that's not to say that that's anybody's decision on that is right or wrong. It says to me, though, why do we want to spend our efforts getting mired down in the use of that extraordinary power when the federal government itself has indicated a reluctance to do so? And they are reluctant to do so in part because of the reaction of the provinces. And if you read the act, it specifically says it should only be used in the absence of any other law that can deal with this, and that it has to be used in concert with the province. And I'm willing to bet money that if we went down this road now as a council, we will simply get ourselves mired into a lengthy, unsatisfactory, non-productive debate about this with the federal government and with the province, both of whom will not want to see the country go down this road, because it starts with a declaration of emergency that the federal government, even after all this time and all the tragedy and all the problems across the country, has not done. So are they now going to do it just, when I say just, are they going to do it solely on account of Toronto making a request in respect of what is an urgent situation here? I don't think so. So I guess what I would say, Speaker, is that I would rather see us put our efforts into approaching those governments for the money that we need to fund the supports that are needed to make this housing appropriate and supportive of the people who will enter this housing, so that we can get on with that, because the report clearly identifies the fact that we will not be able to do even what this report contemplates without that support. And I've been trying, and others have as well, Deputy Mayor Bilo and so on, to even get supportive housing funding for the modular units that people are moving into as we speak. And they haven't as yet delivered on that. And I think this is a real problem for us. We have a little bit of money, as the report says, that we have available to do this in the early period. But make no mistake, we will get to the stage where that money has run out. And I do not believe it is the responsibility of the city government by itself to be doing this. It just isn't. A lot of this is part, as far as I see it, is the healthcare system for people who have mental health issues and substance use issues and things like that. So I will vote against part 2 of Councillor Perks' motion, because I think it's just a wholly inappropriate request to make, given the reality of what we've looked at during this pandemic and their reluctance and failure to use that power so far. And I'm not being critical of them. They've made their own decision about that. And the realities of how this country works, and it will just get bogged down in some endless discussion about what amounts to almost a constitutional matter, as opposed to focusing on just getting the money so we can get these supportive units in place, house these people, and do it in, as the report says, a relatively short period of time, 8 to 12 weeks. So those are my comments, Speaker. I do commend the report, and I do thank the staff for a job extremely well done. These are as dedicated people as I've ever seen. The work they've been doing, from Marianne to Abby to the whole team, led by Deputy Mayor Bilo, is extraordinary. And I think that we spend so much time talking about the shortcomings, and I will acknowledge Councillor Perks complimented them at the beginning, and I think that's good, because they've done extraordinary work during this pandemic, and there's more to be done. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. Can I have a motion for us to complete voting on this item before we break? And also we
So moved.
Also, we have 2 members' motions to bring forward. Okay, moved by
Madam
Councillor.
Speaker, can I move a motion to work through lunch?
No.
Yeah, let's complete the agenda.
We're going to have a half-hour break, members. So it will be a half-hour lunch. Thank you. Okay, moved by Councillor Holiday. All in favor? Carried. Okay, so we can put the motions on the screen?
Madam Speaker, on a point of order, I did wish to vote for items 6, 11, and 13 separately. Those are the items that pertain to
Yes, we have that.
delegation authority.
Yes, we have that, Councillor Holiday. We have that.
Thank you.
And Madam Speaker, just to be sure, Councillor Park's motion will also be separated?
Yes. Okay, if we can put the motion on the screen. Okay, Councillor, Councillor Bylaws motion. Yeah. So we're voting on 6, 11, and 13 separately. Okay?
Madam Speaker, can I just ask a question on a procedural point of order? If I vote for this motion, does it make Councillor Perks's motion redundant?
No.
No, this is we're voting on items 6, 11, 13 on PH 19.11A.
Could I clarify, are we voting on the items that Councillor Holiday pulled out right now?
Yes.
Thank you.
This is on the report on, and Councillor Holiday wanted to vote on items 6, 11, and 13 separately. That's what we're voting on.
Councillor Ainslie, your vote, please. Thank you. Councillor Fletcher, please. Speaker, parts 6, 11, and 13 of motion 1 carry. The vote is 20-4.
Okay. Okay, so on the balance of motion 1. Okay, on favor?
Recorded.
Recorded. Okay.
Councillor Peruzza, are you present and voting? And if so, would you please turn your camera on, please, for the vote? Madam Speaker, the balance of motion 1 carries unanimously, 24 in favor.
Okay, now we have motion by Councillor Perks. We'll vote on that separately as well. Part 1 and part 2. Okay, on part 1. Did you want to record?
Please.
Recorded vote.
Councillor Bradford, thank you. Speaker, part 1 of motion 2 by Councillor Perks carries. The vote is 22-1.
Okay, part 2 recorded vote. Recorded vote.
Members stand by. We'll open the voting panel in a moment.
Okay, it's on the screen, recorded vote.
Councillor Perruzza, please. Part 2 of motion 2 by Councillor Perks does not carry. The vote is 6 to 17.
The item. Okay, that's the item. So we have two members' motion we want to introduce. The first one, Councillor Pasternak.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The reason for the urgency is the fire at 6250 Bathurst Street. We need to create a working group immediately so that we can get tenants back into the building. We can provide all the supports they need through loss of food and clothing, and that we can come together with the various social agencies to work over the holiday season. Thank you.
Thank you. On the motion, on favor, carried. Mayor Tory?
Yes, Speaker. I have a motion here that would authorize myself with the Chief Financial Officer to enter into an agreement to receive $776 million in transit funding that has been announced by the provincial government. And I would think we'd certainly want to take that on and sign the necessary agreements and rush the check over to the bank and cash it immediately, because we're very much in need of that money, obviously, to offset our losses for 2020 because of the pandemic. And so this would authorize the Chief Financial Officer and myself to execute those agreements between the times of the council meetings.
Okay, on favor, carried. Okay, members, will come back in a half hour, which will be 1:10. The staff just need a small little break. So at 1:10, we'll be back. Thank you.
Hi, Josie. How are you? It's Paula. I'm okay, thanks. I'm just following up.
Your mic is on.